thank you for all of those that have kind of tuned into this session of our briefing with an expert this morning, Jen Underwood. And we're going to do something interesting today, given it's the beginning of 2017. We're going to talk about some trends, and especially around hot analytic industry topics and technologies. I'll introduce Jen in a little bit, but welcome to the program, Jen.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Jen is the founder and principal of Impact Analytics. Jen has an awesome background. She's worked for a number of different companies in the tech sector, but she's also done a ton of consulting. So she has a great perspective on what's going on in the industry. She's done a lot of design work, but also has a great background in marketing. So she has a very unique perspective on the market. She's a IBM Analytics Insider, a SaaS contributor, a former Tableau Zen Master, and is an active member in the BAC community. So with that, she is uniquely positioned, I think, to talk about some of the different areas and some of the new technologies and trends that we should be seeing over this next year. So Jen, thanks for being here today and kind of taking on this challenge.
Oh, that's such a nice intro. Thank you. I don't mind it. So back in the day, I was in technical pre-sales. I'd get peppered with questions, and I loved it because I studied. People don't realize I'm actually technical, and they like to try to stump me, but I'm fairly extreme in my studies. So no, I don't mind being peppered. It usually doesn't bother me one bit.
So probably your biggest area is all around the area of analytics. So let's start, we're going to tick through a number of different areas and kind of in and around, but let's start with analytics.
Okay.
Where do you see this analytics market going, and what are some of the big trends, et cetera?
So I think one of the most exciting trends that I'm seeing right now is predictive certainly is finally taking the center stage. And you think about the digital business transformation and things like cognitive analytics, predictive analytics, even some prescriptive analytics, finally getting the justice that they deserve. 10 years ago, I would beg people for their data sets because we were always doing backwards, looking backwards. I'm like, no, you can look forwards and be proactive and predictive. And I'm finally seeing that. It's really quite fun to see that happen and gain traction. And what's interesting to follow is that's really the critical difference when you look at, when Gartner posted their last conference here in Orlando, talked about its intelligence and analytics being the center of a digital universe. And it really is, when you think about everything just being automated and that intelligence in these digital ecosystems deciding what to send you next to personalize it, et cetera. That's all analytics in the background that powers it. Oh, I think you're muted, Rich.
I had some background noise, so I muted myself.
Oh, yeah, I'm like, I think you're muted. I can't hear you. I can see your mouth moving.
So what about real-time analytics?
Ooh, so it was funny. That's certainly something historically, and I remember I was on a project in 2007, so this is already 10 years ago, that it was for Wall Street settlement and clearing of trades, and we were trying to figure out how quickly could we get the analytics that was for the systems themselves to see what trades have been successful, if there were any errors and whatnot, and it was very difficult. And we made kind of compromises, right, with the business on, well, we can get close, but not exactly there, and we can pre-aggregate, we can do some things every 15 minutes. Today it's interesting because we're seeing these ingest engines, and they're able to handle and throttle, and with cloud, the capabilities to handle real time are there, and they're grossly easy. So I was playing and showing demos, was it last year, with the Azure Event Hub. There's certainly other ones out there that ingest data, and I figured it out. And yes, I'm technical, but honestly, it was point and click, and then it fed the dashboard live. I'm like, this is amazing. And I would literally give presentations with people. I'm like, go ahead and tweet. Well, we'll watch my Twitter stream. And it was a blast. So the technology is there to do it. It's really easier than ever to do, and certainly can make a difference if you are talking about, some of these industries where maybe you do have software as a service, or you do want to monitor things real time, it's certainly much easier to do that now today than it's ever been before.
So, and that kind of leads into another area. You know, historically, 15 years ago, when we started down this kind of BI and into analytics, it was all kind of a function that happened kind of offline, off by itself. So much of the analytics we're seeing today are embedded. And is that a trend that we're going to see accelerate? Do you think we're there?
So it is interesting. I just did some research too with a company called Logi Analytics on this. And there was another company, Izenda, and we've been doing some research and studies on this. And we looked at adoption. And when adoption improves, it's when a user does not have to spin up a separate application. And that makes a lot of sense to me. If you think about, let's just talk about the flow of analytics, and as you're in the application itself, when and where you need to make a decision is where that analytics resides. They will use it. They don't want to spin up a separate portal. It's just certainly not going to happen. And thinking about it and talking about it, really it was a matter of selling change. And when you think about selling change, that's tough. It's hard to change. I've been trying to get my husband to use some of these tools. He's an analyst in the PM space for an energy company. For years, and getting him to change is so difficult. But if we put it right into the application, even Mr. Underwood will use these tools. So what I think we'll see in digital transformation, as we've seen with the Salesforce Einstein, and we're starting to see in some of these other applications, you start thinking about Marketo, the analytics is baked in right there with the predictive as well, suggesting and saying, hey, these are the next steps, or these are the recommendations. Yes, I think we're going to see more of it for the purpose of just being savvier. You know, we've gotten there. In addition to, hey, we have to work digitally, and it really changes the sales process and the outbound marketing. Now we're talking about digital processes, omni-channel experiences, and folks, may never contact a sales rep. So you have to have that system be smart enough and get the information back to the users that need it, the analytics right there of, hey, what's been successful and not, so they can channel them to the right next message.
Which actually allows a lot of automation, where these analytics can actually start driving processes, which is another big area.
Mm-hmm. So I've been fascinated with automation. BeyondCore, I saw BeyondCore the first time, I want to say it was Gartner BI conference, maybe 3 years ago. And I was skeptical. There's some pieces you do have to really optimize, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But what it did do very, very well was taking some of the busy work and combining and looking for correlations and things that I would do if you've ever had a stats class, or you've ever had data mining and predictive analytics classes. There's these steps that you go through to find out what are the significant variables that have lift, and they have what we call information gain in data science world, and identifying those steps and cleansing the data, and that piece is usually most of the work. And if you can kind of automate aspects of that, you can find those nuggets so much quickly. What I liked about it was it would find things that I may never have thought about, even combining those variables, or the magic I would call the art and science of data prep. And it's so fast and so amazing. Where the weaknesses still are, and I've written about this a couple times and whatnot, is the fact that you still need to validate those results. They're not always contextually accurate, that these systems, even Watson, so you really probably want to be doing a little bit of, hey, does this really make sense? Would somebody ever do this? And I'll give you a simple example. One of the insurance companies, we did a predictive engagement on when to recruit the right people, because they invest so much time in training, who would be successful. And at the end of the day, the algorithm found, don't hire anyone from New York City. Well, that's bizarre. Why is that? We went back to the business, and the business said, oh yeah, the law changed this and that. We never even considered that data source. We never would have really known. So there's still that need to, I guess, they have a lot of advantages, but it also is, garbage in, garbage out. There's a lot of talk in the industry right now about bias. in those algorithms, things like, hey, we're automatically predicting criminals and oh my gosh, and profiling. A lot of that can have bias in it because of the data that it's being fed. So those are, when you talk about automation, it has a lot of benefits. There's concerns the industry has as well, as you still have to have that subject matter expert too. So a lot of people are afraid of it. I actually think it brings a tremendous value to an organization if used responsibly and understanding and navigating those risks.
You know what? You just stumbled on a topic I'd love to have.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I know about it.
Where we can spend 45 minutes, and it's the subject of correlation versus causality.
Oh,
because
goodness.
this whole issue of, we jump to conclusions based on correlations without really understanding causality, which is kind of what you were talking about. But we won't go there because that could spend 45 minutes.
Easily on that. Yeah, there's a lot of, you have to really be careful when you're doing analysis and making sure that even your collection methodology is decent. There is, the tools, what I will say that I fear is you have a lot of folks now, they're easy buttons and visual analytics tools. Boom, all the time, look, it's quick insights or it's whatever it is. And it makes no sense at all. The findings, and someone won't really know. They won't ever look at the score of the model or even know, hey, the model scored great, but it's a terrible model. It didn't even include the right data sources. That's what scares me, and we're definitely heading there. It's unavoidable.
So that you just kind of bridged exactly to the next question that I had, which is you've also spent a bunch of time talking and looking at visualization techniques over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yep.
Where do you think visualization is going? Because where I don't know if these technologies, how usable they're going to be, but some of the things I'm seeing are amazing.
Oh, it's fun. I think it's a really fun time in this space. What I'm seeing, and by the way, I have a super fun blog coming up, super fun, and it's a themed blog around Valentine's Day theme, but I'm going to start it probably next week. So just for people that do follow the blog, and it's going to be a showcase of visual vendors with a very, very fun Valentine's theme. And I do have vendors participating in this. It's free and fun. But it's just one of my sicknesses, really. But when I look at, I'm asking everyone to send me essentially what makes them unique and beautiful to profile in their profile. Essentially, I'm seeing a lot of the same things, but I'm also seeing these solutions get smarter. So I'm seeing a combination of the automation. I'm seeing a combination of intelligent data prep, seeing more predictive. I just talked about, I have some mixed feeling. I love it because I know what I'm doing with it. But I also fear what craziness will come out of it. So I'm seeing more predictive being baked right into an easy button there. I still haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of what if and prescriptive recommendations yet. That seems to still be that rare vendor that can handle that. But what I am seeing, if I think about, there was Wayne Eckerson, I believe it was, and I hope I got the right fellow there. Someone it was a wonderful Venn diagram and showed all the older lives. So it might have been TDWI. I'm trying to remember who had this wonderful Venn diagram. And what I'm seeing now are all these things intersecting together. So now you have big data intersecting with everybody who has HTML5 that can, it's worth anything. You have the HTML5 and you put that on big data, but then you also have predictive and you also have the easy create charts. And, some people have automated some of this process. The savvier ones are able to use intelligence to even prep the data for you. But basically what I'm seeing is everything just merged into one solution.
That's awesome. So let's change a little bit direction. What about IoT? IoT we've been talking about for years. Uh-oh.
Yes, I've been dying to get started with this. Raspberry Pi folks and IoT easy button from AWS and all these gadgets. So I'm collecting gadgets and trying to get started. What I certainly see is we have things like Alexa and all these different smart devices, smart home. My husband has a silly watch that, tracks him when he runs and stuff like that. This is absolutely, when you look at the trends in the future, this is where we are absolutely heading. There's going to be more things than people. So this is a bigger side. In what I would say, my smart techies in my network, I see them getting into IoT. So I'm like, oh, I can't fall behind. And I looked and I reached out to one who pointed me to Raspberry Pi. It was about a year ago. I just need to have time to play with it now. But certainly, I think It's growing. It's still early adopter. You know, you have the early, it reminds me of 2010 times with big data when I had a couple accounts that were spinning up pizza boxes and throwing Hadoop on there, and they're like, yeah, or man, the queries are slow when we go to lunch. And, you know, they're just kind of trying to figure out that, hey, this isn't really a live querying system. It's it's more batch reporting type things. I feel like we're at that phase right now with IoT of folks kind of figuring out, wow, we have this sensor and it froze up and we never thought about the weather conditions in this, you know, just they're starting to learn those basic lessons that folks were learning in big data back in 2010.
So what do you think, what's the impact going to be in terms of analytics? And is this going to drive more virtualization, visualization techniques? Sorry.
I think it has to. I think big data in general, when I look at these tools, and I've been critical about this, oh my gosh, now 4 years, because I honestly, the only time I've ever been in tears, happy tears at a conference was I saw Tableau's Kraken demo back in 2012, I believe it was. And they were the first company that could visualize millions of data points on the screen. And it was amazing because most points at that time, I think it was like 1,000 for most of the tools that are out there. And then they do some subsetting and they do some crazy stuff. But I think what we'll see is we'll certainly see the ability to render more data sets and more data so you can get a bigger idea. I think we'll get smarter with filtering out some of the noise because these devices generate ridiculous amounts of data. So it's figuring out, you know, what's the noise here versus what is real. When I was playing with some of these live, you talked about the real-time analytics. I was playing with, I'm going to say it was the Event Hub plus there's Azure Streaming Analytics. There was a functionality in there that you could put in a predictive algorithm right during the stream itself to look for outliers and whatnot. And I thought that was phenomenal too. So then, yeah, you could filter out the noise and get those events. So from the visualization standpoint, I think you'll take some of those techniques of filtering out the noise from the real data. The other piece that I've been following is different ways to visualize data. And this probably jumps to a pet area or a fun area that I'm tracking. It's very early right now, is the augmented reality, virtual reality space. I've got yet another gadget. Oh, I guess call me Gadget Girl. I have another, it's a Gear Oculus. I have a customer though, I need to get the fancier Oculus. And I've been following and reviewing some of the early adopters in that space on visualizing data very, very differently. I have a fun blog on that and a fun session on that where we go through some of the demos and things like motion sickness and just things I never would have motion sickness designing a product before. But the amazing experience is like, holy smokes, I can actually dive into my data. I can explore it. I can look at it 360 degrees. Or even just the use cases where I can walk into a store and just kind of look and scan and be like, oh, there's the chart right there. There's the information I want. That's so cool, and it is coming.
Would you recommend that to kind of our members to go out and kind of get to a trade show where they can experience that, or is there an inexpensive technology out there that they can kind of play with?
So the first thing that I had seen, trying to remember the first virtual reality, I don't even remember what my first virtual reality thing that I saw was. But essentially, I then looked and searched on the web for. Salesforce had a demo. It was kind of a primitive demo. I couldn't figure out what they were showing, but I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. Then I found a company called Datascape. And I said, okay, well, they're really interesting. And we talked for a while, and they were, you know, revisiting some of their design choices and whatnot. And I said, well, this is fascinating. It's the 3D world coming together. And then looking further, I'd found, well, a lot of scientific companies have been doing this just a little differently. So most of the hardware and whatnot, this one I think was 100, the gear or whatnot was about 100, 120. I mean, the software in Unity 3D is the environment to dev this. It was so expensive, and even still, I push back. I have a customer that wants me to review a product, and I'm like, well, if you buy me the goodies, because that's a couple grand, and I'm generous with my time. I can't be generous with my savings either. We have to have some kind of give-get here. But essentially, it's expensive right now. There's not a lot out there, but I see it start to happening. If you want to experience it, most of the conferences I've been going to seem to have a little bit of it. So IBM Watson Analytics had an experience, again, with the Oculus. There's also HTV Vive, I think it's called. That's another device. If you just want to get started really, really cheap, this one, like I said, was $100, and you just use your iPhone, and you can explore. I have some demos on my blog from Wall Street Journal, and just some other sites of people that are getting started, so you can kind of get that experience, as well as just learn how to interact in that environment. So there is a learning curve there. There on the cheapest side is Google Cardboard. And again, you just throw your iPhone in there and you can look around, and it's $20, and it's definitely not the experience even of this $100 one really made a big difference for me. But I'd say, hey, if you want to play with it, it's cool, it's coming. It's the devices are better. They're still pricey, and in analytics, it's still early.
So what about cloud? And what do you foresee in cloud over this next kind of year?
So it's been really interesting, and I'll give a little background. So 2 or 3 years ago, when I would talk to somebody about the cloud, oh no, we will never. I mean, it was so contentious, that the conversations, and there were difficult conversations to have, because at the time I was at Microsoft and helping redesign a product, and it was cloud only, and there really wasn't any plan necessarily for on-prem. And those were super difficult conversations. Well, I'll be darned if the same, groups, all of a sudden I'd look and I'd say, they're running a POC. So I reached out to them and I said, hey, how's it going? I see you're using the cloud. And I knew in my head that they told me, a year and a half earlier, that they absolutely positively refused to do it. So the attitude has certainly changed. When I've done some research recently, it's still maybe 20% out there that have adopted cloud, or are kind of pure cloud in the analytics space. A lot of them are hybrid. And they're still, I talked to an organization this morning, an investment group in, was it Germany or UK? I can't remember exactly where they were located. And they said, no, we are still, compliance and certain things, even though they're using Salesforce, they couldn't use their analytics. They needed to keep that on-prem from that perspective. So I do think there's a mix, and it's certainly going to happen. I think the dynamics with the vendors are going to change. I've heard more about Google this year than I've ever heard, and certainly Amazon finally stepped up their game in analytics, and now I'm getting into that. But yeah, it's going to happen. I think at the end of the day, though, there's still going to be hybrid for a long, long time, because Amazon drove this big truck onto the stage, and I'm like, oh my God. But that's the reality. It's so impossible to move all that big data. And if you have a ton of data on-prem, it's not going to be an immediate move.
Which leads right into, I think, one of the maybe perceptions that held cloud back for a few years, and that's the whole concept of data security and privacy. And so where do you think that's going over this next year?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the most, and I'll be transparent. I wasn't pro cloud. I wasn't pro cloud even maybe 2 years ago. I read, it was after the Sony hack, Steven Sinofsky has a blog, and it talked about the weakness of on-premises technologies, how folks don't update, and having been a product manager, I certainly know that's absolutely the case. When somebody would call and I said, oh my gosh, we haven't patched that software in a couple years, you need to upgrade. It was Steven Sinofsky's blog that talked about, I can't remember, it was a slammer virus, I believe. He talked about all the different weaknesses and whatnot. And I said, holy cow. So, actually on-prem, for the most part, is probably less secure than you realize. And if you're in a big organization, there are definitely weaknesses, especially if you're cheaping out on software. Oh my gosh! So all the vendors, you really want to keep at least compliant with something that's patched and supported. But there's still fear. There's still some fear. What I will say, having worked for one of the largest ones in the world, it's taken super seriously. The product managers, the whole team, have to take certain classes on how to handle data. It's, I couldn't even necessarily look up who was using, even though I may be measured on who is adopting. It's super, super seriously taken. It's something that at the top level, the CEOs of these companies, they're getting notifications on anything like that. It's probably more insane, insanely covered, and so important for those cloud organizations, for their livelihoods. They've taken that much more seriously, I think, than they ever did on-prem.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And that's been my perspective for a long time, which is when you take these organizations that have clouds as their business, if they don't take this serious, their business could be gone overnight. And I think the fact is they're putting a lot more attention to these details than a lot of the on-prem companies. And I agree with you 100%. And I think I think as a trend, I'll just ask, it seems like to me that's going to become more visible to the market as we kind of move over the next couple of years. And I think the understanding of the comparison between the kind of protection of your data in the cloud versus on-prem, I think is going to be an interesting transition.
It will. So one of the things I think is key there is these solutions, at least in the analytics space, a lot of them are still maturing. And when I would guide customers, I'd still say, well, you probably still want to maybe use the on-prem solution and think about using it in the cloud. Stand up a VM in the cloud because you're going to have more functionality. The other thing that you may find, and this is when I look at these solutions, is their certifications. Are they HIPAA compliant yet? Are they PCI compliant? Can they really handle it or not? And they're starting to get there. So even if you would have asked me last year, a few of them really weren't mature yet, and they're starting to go there. When you start to see the federal government using these solutions and whatnot, and they've passed these criteria that they can use it, you see the certifications, then you're going to start to look at, hey, do I have feature parity in the functionalities? Because I see a lot of focus right now on getting those certifications and the security. In the meantime, folks don't realize, wow, I can't execute R on the cloud. Oh, no, that's a bummer. I mean, just certain things like that they don't realize they're making that trade-off because it's so fun and easy just to spin it up and be done. That is the beauty of cloud. And that is actually what I liked about it was I hated setting up servers. I loathed it. So just spinning it up and going, well, this is fun. I can just play. I can do the fun stuff and not the icky stuff that I didn't like. But at the same token, I'd always be bummed out, and I'm still kind of bummed out when I'm like, oh gosh, you don't even have a map chart, come on. Just certain things I get really grumbly about. But yeah, you're gonna find still now it's more of, hey, can they get the same kind of functionality that they had? Because now it's restricted, you're in a multi-tenant environment or whatever type of environment you're in the cloud, it's a bit more challenging. On the flip side, I think what's really hard is keeping up. Oh my God. So as product manager, we were releasing something like almost three a week. So we called them weekly releases, but I couldn't even hardly keep up. I certainly don't expect my customers to keep up. Watching Amazon's conference, how many releases they have, I'm like, oh my gosh. The customers can't keep up, the documentation teams can't keep up. There's a whole nother dynamic therein. Wow. But if you are on-prem and you're thinking, oh yeah, we'll be okay. And I have these conversations. I had a really difficult conversation with a customer recently in a product review that, oh, none of our customers are on cloud. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a very risky decision at this point, because easily within 1 year, someone on cloud can out-innovate you. So anyways, I rambled.
No problem. That's great. It's great insights and great help to our members. So let's take the second half of that. With some of the privacy legislation, especially in Europe, the right to be forgotten and those kinds of things, how do you think that's going to change kind of what we're doing in analytics, and how is that going to affect us over the next year to 2 years?
So it's fascinating. That is an area that I'm looking at a little bit, but not very deeply right now. It's a concern area that I have. I've heard at some of the thought leader meetings and whatnot that I've been in recently that there are certain laws that affect the profit lines of companies. I think this is the law you're talking about.
Yes.
Like, holy smokes. And instead of the lawyers just looking at contracts, now they're sitting in the deal selection. I'm like, oh, that should be fun. I don't know if I miss tech sales now. But that would be interesting. So from the privacy perspective, even when I'm looking at, so I looked at something recently, and it was the personality profiles that they grab for people, and they give to finance and they give to marketing companies and whatnot. And I'm like, ooh, I just don't know how I feel about that. and how, how you're profiling my activities like this. Yeah, it is a little creepy because there's so much information. It's so, what you're going to see a lot of, and I see it earlier right now in the marketing space, in digital media, is personalization to your actual, hey, this is person likes dogs and she likes planting and gardening. It's just a little too personal, because I would love to have a little bit of, hey, here's my professional life and I love data, but I don't necessarily want you to know that I absolutely love my puppy dogs and a huge softie there. I may not want that to mix, but it's certainly crossing the line. And I think I read some interesting things too, where there was a woman or a man, or there was a couple trying to go off the grid, and it was physically pretty much impossible to do that. I know my dad, older man, tried to get credit. He's always paid bills his whole life, but he likes to go into the bank, meet the people. Granted, he's an older guy, he needs that socialization. But he didn't necessarily have a digital he didn't have an email. He didn't know how to use an email. I won't even go there, because that, oh my gosh, that could be very special, and all the things that people prey on those poor older people. But he didn't have a digital presence, so they weren't going to give him credit. Oh my God, my dad's probably never missed a payment in his entire life. But he didn't have a digital footprint. So that's interesting too, of, there will be people that may not want one, and, can you exist without one? I don't know, but I'm certainly, I'm going to the Gartner Data Analytics conference, and I think the expert on that space is Merv Adrian, maybe beginning a session on that. I hope I got the right one. But I'm absolutely attending at just about anything that has to do with that, because I want to understand that too.
I think it's an area we're all going to have to pay attention to, because I think not only how we use the data, but how we store it, and all of that's going to be a really interesting challenge for us over the next couple of years. So let's go back. Something I wanted to talk about earlier, and just in this last conversation, data quality. Data quality was one of those things that we talked a lot about a few years ago, but I think with the volume of data and the amount of analysis we're doing these days, all of a sudden people are realizing how important data quality is. But I'll let you talk about where you see that and how important that's going to be over this next year or so.
So it's fascinating you mentioned that. I did some research a little bit later last year, and one of the hottest topics, and the CDO topics and what folks are responsible for, is data quality. I mentioned earlier garbage in, garbage out. But essentially, having high quality data is the top pain point for analytics success. And when you talk to people that are practitioners, it's the quality of data that they're getting, and how to deal with that is certainly a very high topic. What's kind of fun and interesting, I'm actively doing research in this space. So if anyone has insights to share, I'm happy to hear them on, how to handle it. And some tools are out there that can handle some of this, and some of it's still good old fashioned processes and people and old MDM and data steward stuff, where, if I had an engagement like that thrown my way, I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. Give me a build. But yeah, essentially you still have the people element to it. But what is fun are the systems these days are smarter. So they are taking the intelligence, and they are taking that machine learning built into the process to automatically learn from the data and your initial corrections. So it's not as tedious and boring and poke your eyes out as it used to be years ago. But it will be a hot topic. It's ranked quite, when you look at what are the pains that people are having, and usually vendors trying to solve pains, or even organizations themselves say, we've got self-service ready to go. It's easy. People are trained. Now what? And you go, wow, the data looks terrible. Or you start to question, and you say, when you start seeing those reports and you see the visualizations, you say, I'm seeing the errors in our data. So how do we fix that? So that I think, part of that also is just the maturity curve, or the natural, more people using the data, more people seeing the holes in the data.
The other thing that I'll ask you what your observations are is, we now are in a place where all the data we've been talking about over the last 20 minutes or so used to be on premises, and it was there, and it was all in one. We used to have a data warehouse where it was all centralized, et cetera, at least in an ideal world. Now we have a lot of applications that are running, SaaS applications that are running in a cloud, which have their own little database, and it may be a Salesforce system. And then we have a marketing automation system and a support system, and we have on-prem financial systems. One of the areas that it seems like is a big issue around data quality is just finding, kind of mastering all of that data together and getting it so that you end up with a common kind of view of a customer. What's your observations on that going forward?
So it is fun. So some of the more popular applications right now, when I look at, and they're definitely serving a need that's been there for a while, is what I would say handling data everywhere. So you've got data all over the place. There are these data catalogs, and they may be, Waterline's one of them, Elation's one of them. Probably not going to do them the justice. I think Cisco has one of them. Microsoft had Azure Data Catalog. Again, these are all probably within the last couple of years they've come out. But what's really cool about them is essentially, they bring in, or you bring in areas of that data, and there's like a Google-like search that happens. You can find the data sources. There's usually tagging and metadata involved in it. So the folks that want to do reporting, oh yeah, I want Joe Schmo's version of this, and this is exactly what I wanted. So they're able to find it, and at least an organization has an idea of what they have for those data sources. Another pattern I'm seeing, it's not necessarily the data catalog, but it's been one that it's kind of making a renaissance. There's a couple things making a renaissance. Governance is making a renaissance. We're done with our midlife crisis now of, boy, the dashboards are pretty. And wow, isn't that cool? And now they're like, oh my gosh, I got myself into a mess, and hi, IT, I need some help. So now we're shifting again to the other side. But the other side here is virtualization. So virtualization, data virtualization, had a lot of performance issues. It was a neat concept, but this concept of a logical data warehouse where I can just point and do queries to maybe a REST service. And again, when you think about service APIs and the service API economy, you're having this with databases and maybe your apps and whatnot. This is coming to life again, and there's a couple of those. I think Cisco has probably one of the better one of those. Denoto's another one that I've heard of in that space. I know I'm forgetting somebody. SnapLogic, oh, that's who I was forgetting. But these guys on the data virtualization space, it's a logical data warehouse. You point the users to it with like an ODBC connection. They don't have any idea they're querying a REST data service that you provided, data as a service per se. They just get working, and the tech's finally gotten good enough where it's performant. That was the pains why it kind of stumbled in the past.
That's awesome. So one last area, and we're going to go in a completely different area, and that is, Gartner, I think Doug Laney at Gartner and others, Merv, have talked about data as an asset. And, it was kind of a new concept a few years ago. Where is that going? And are people really starting to get a solid sense of the value of the data that they actually have?
Yes. Very opinionated on that. Why do you think that a lot of these apps are free? It's to get you on a mailing list for this digital transformation. And, I have people that contact me all the time. Can you just post this? Can you post this link to your thing? It'll be free, this, and that. And I'm like, yeah, but basically you're collecting emails from my audience. That's kind of rude. I'm not sure if I really want you to do that. So yeah, it's the data, and I have a little saying in some of my, it's a slide in one of my presentations that talks about industry trends of the app is free because data is gold. It's literally golden, and it's taking that information. And when Microsoft bought LinkedIn for however much it was, billions of dollars, really it was, wow, now they have all those conversations, they have all those jobs and those relationships. He can combine it and put it in our CRM. And why Salesforce had, really pushed back on that. It was like, holy smokes, this is really, really powerful data. And of course it's going to go into the cognitive engine. Of course it's probably going to be fed into the sales field and whatnot. That's scary stuff. And again, this is the kind of world we're moving into where you're taking the data to feed cognitive algorithms. So now I've got the data on this, and I'm going to take this personality data from this and look at this person, everything they ever wrote in their life, and assign them moods and, oh my gosh, you name it. And I've seen these. I've been Digital Reasoning has one of these. SAS has Visual Insights. There's these different cognitive apps that completely profile you, your whole network and everything. And I'm like, ew, I don't mind if it's being used for terrorists, but I don't like it being used for me. And not that I do anything wrong. I'm kind of boring. I'm actually very boring, but it's just, yeah, we're in an interesting time.
What about the whole kind of side conversation around data as an asset, which is around monetization of information?
I think there's, like I said, there's definitely value in that. I wish I would have built LinkedIn and I could have sold it for $10 billion, whatever it was that they sold it for. There's a lot to be said about it. I'm certainly hearing a lot more of that. I'm also hearing more ecosystems being built and people sharing data, maybe that historically throughout the supply chain may not have done that, or even they're collaborating with competitors because it's all about getting the data. So in cloud world, it's all about getting the data and charging you for that recurring revenue stream. And it's the war on data between these massive cloud vendors. But even when you look at across the ecosystem, I'm certainly having people look at the digital assets that they have and say, wow, I can actually sell this and somebody will buy this mailing list. Like I said, a lot of these people that are wanting me to send my audience their way for signing up for something, they want something, you know, for free, but it's not really free because they'll turn around and sell that mailing list to lots of people or something. I see a lot of that happening, or just, you know, side businesses within an organization saying, wow, we're getting all this information. It's not our core line of business, but we can monetize, we can anonymize and monetize this. And I've seen this in an industry where folks would go into office, you know, go in and they register for a few things and whatnot. And the company, I don't want to even say the industry because it probably freak people out, but basically people are not really opting in for their data to be anonymized and then resold to this whole pharmaceutical type industry. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's not what we expected the data to be used for. But yeah, it's been going on. I think it's going on more now than it was before.
So we've covered a lot of territory, lots of territory this morning. Just for curiosity, anything else that we've kind of not touched on that you think is something that our members really need to pay attention to over the next 12 to 18 months?
I'm thinking. No, I think if you don't keep your skills up to date, you know, if you haven't really budgeted time, you're going to want to do that because things are changing faster than they've ever changed before. So if you are slammed like most tech people are slammed and analytics people are slammed, do take some time to learn some of the cloud tech that's out there. Even if your company's completely will not do any cloud, you never know, they could change their mind next week. And you know, just try and keep up with some of the stuff going on.
Well, thank you for being here today and sharing all these great insights about the market and technologies you're seeing. Ryan, did we get any questions from the audience?
Yes. So I have one question to pass along. And before I do that, again, I'll take this opportunity to mention to anybody who maybe joined halfway through or something, that Q&A button there at the top or maybe bottom, depending on how your window's configured. That's the way you can submit a question right now if you'd like to. So I'll encourage anybody who's on and who wants to do that now. But then in the meantime, yeah, so one question we do already have, this gets back, Jen, to the IoT topic. So here's the question. Have you worked on any projects where real world companies are using IoT data in a meaningful way? What does this look like? And I think maybe so my interpretation of that is, you know, you mentioned a couple consumer side IoT things. So the smartwatch your husband has, Alexa, Amazon's Alexa, that's essentially an IoT type device. You've got your Raspberry Pi in the room there. Those are all kind of consumer sides. So I think this question is getting at, you know, have you seen companies sort of moving into this? So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, so I'm not necessarily implementing as much anymore, but I do follow a lot of my peers that are. And what I'm seeing are things, say, and my husband's energy company is an example of one that's, you know, using Internet of Things to determine, you know, potential outages and hotspots on information. You know, airlines are certainly using these types of things. When you look at even a group like, say, an Amazon or a logistic type company, those companies, exactly where that package is being tracked, those types of things. One of the more interesting case studies, and the one that I saw was a lessons learned that was really interesting. They, again, were in the power industry and looking at, preventing outages, because for them, an outage can be pretty painful for them. So those are at least what I'm seeing right now. I've noticed, so not that I stalk, because he's on my Facebook, but I kind of get a feeling, and we used to cover the same accounts. I'll see where this fellow is going, and I'll say, I know exactly where you are, because if you're going to this little town, I only know one customer that would be possible using IoT. So, I'm seeing more retailers starting to use it, and I have to imagine it has to be, and this is going to be a yes, it's going to have to be in their supply chain.
Great. Thanks. And no other questions live at this point. So Rich, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, Jen, thank you again for being here today and sharing your insights. And I encourage all the folks that are paying attention to BAC to go in and check out Jen's site. She blogs, she has some great content. It's a way for you to stay up with the industry and some of the things that are going on. So thank you all for being here today. And thank you again, Jen, for spending an hour with us, and I hope that we'll do this again soon.
Oh, it was fun. Thanks for having me.
And so with that, I'll say that we're going to end the webinar here today. Thanks again to everybody who joined live. And if you're watching in the future via the power of the internet and you have questions, because you're watching this on replay, you can submit those at Jen Underwood's discussion forum at BACollaborative. So again, encourage you to come by BACollaborative.com today. Join. It's a free community for all of us in the world of analytics. And then also JenUnderwood.com is where you can find Jen's site, her own site, and then she has an expert portal at BAC as well, where there's content and a great way to connect with and keep up with her. So that's all for today. On behalf of BAC, thanks for joining. We'll see you in the community.